Hey y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Well, we're finally out of the dungeon and finally outside. Spring has arrived in New England, and I'm pretty psyched to be back outside again. And I'm sure wherever you are, it's getting to be pretty nice too. So, we have the Preakness to talk about, and we're going to do it like we always do with our elements of handicapping for the Triple Crown races. And we will begin with part one, which is form. So, let's take a look. So when we start with our Elements of Handicapping series, we're going to concentrate on the four corners of handicapping: form, class, speed, and pace. And many of you who have seen our postings before on the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont from last year and the Derby for this year know that that's how we do it. So we have four different parts to this series, and then of course we put it all together. One thing we've done a little differently this year than we did last year is we try to put a numeric value on each one of these aspects. So trying to quantify a little bit to give us an idea of who we want to be thinking about for the Preakness. It worked pretty well in the Derby, came out about as we expected. A little surprise here and there, but judging by the result of the race, I think it did follow that it did narrow down the ones we want to consider. So when we look at form evaluation, obviously there's a lot of different things we think about. How'd the horse break in his last race? What was the trip like? What kind of pace was there? What was the race shape? Was it a hot pace? Was it favoring speed horses or closers? What kind of finish was there? How did the horse finish? What was the quality of the race, the field quality, the contenders? And then finally, progression/regression. So is a horse likely to move forward from his last race, or is he going to regress? So those are all things we're going to take a look at. And then what we do is we have a +2, -2 system, and I got this from Vince Lombardi. He used to grade all his players for every play, and I've just sort of adapted that a little bit, and then just kind of put my own tweak on it. So it goes from excellent, meaning you ran a big race, your last one is a +2, above average +1, average is a 0, a little bit below average -1, and then if you just ran a stinker and just wasn't very good at all, it's a -2. So we will take all the significant prep races each of these contenders have run, and we'll assign a numeric value, one of these from +2 to -2. Then there's a subjective number of progression, and that is a +2 or -2, the same scale as we use for all the elements. And that was basically a number that we'll assign, and we may not assign one, may give it a 0. But the idea is to say, okay, well, he ran really well in this last race, but is he going to do it again in the next one? And if so, if that's the case, we think that's likely, he's going to get a +2. If we think he's going to bounce, he's going to get a -2. So I hope that's clear. I think that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So we'll look at the contenders, and the first we have to see is Mugatu, who's a new shooter. He had been running in the Bluegrass and a couple of races at Turfway. And he's a late runner, so we'll take a look at him first, and we'll see. The Bluegrass Stakes, I didn't think he was okay in it, but he did have pace to run to. I thought it was a race that he should have done better than he did. So given the scenario was ideal for late runners, judging by, of course, what Sierra Leone did, I'd have to give him a -1 because he was kind of a non-factor fifth. The rush away, because the pace was slow, he was forced out of his element and had to be up nearer to the leaders, and I really think it sapped his late kick, and he didn't do very well in that race at all. He gets a -2. And then the Battaglia, I thought he ran a pretty good race. He closed into a halfway decent pace, and he looked like he was a horse that was poised to move forward, but as we can see, the next two, especially the Bluegrass stepping up in class, wasn't very fruitful. Progression-wise, I'm going to give him a +1 because he is his speed numbers are progressing, and I think this horse is getting a little better. I'm not sure that he's going to be a good class fit here, and I really don't think he's got the race shape he's going to want in the Preakness. There doesn't seem to be a lot of speed signed on, but I think he's a horse maybe who can move forward. The question is, how much forward? So then we look at Uncle Heavy, who we saw in the Withers Stakes back in February, running in the mud. And we take a look at him, and we see the Wood Memorial. I thought was not a very good effort on his part, and I'll tell you why. The pace was 2 seconds faster than it was in the Withers, and yet for a deep closer, he really wasn't able to do much with it. He got an okay fifth, but he flattened out the stretch. Now, okay, he did have the 13 hole. That's entirely true. But a late runner, it really doesn't make a difference because he's going to go to the back anyway. And that's what Uncle Heavy did. He did make a move at the stretch, but he flattened right out. And I thought that was a race that really set up well for him, and he didn't do much with it. I would have to gather from that since the Withers was such a significant improvement of what he had run before, that perhaps there was a little bit of a bounce or a regression in there. So is he going to move forward from that? I'm not overly certain. I don't think there's a lot of telltale signs that he is certainly going to run a big one. The only thing I would say is that Butch Reed doesn't ship without a reason. And so I do think it's possible that this horse will run well. But again, being a late runner, he's another one. The race shape doesn't set up terribly well. And so for that reason, I'm not really going to give him anything for progression. So he ends up with a -1 total. Catching Freedom ran, I thought, a very good Kentucky Derby. I didn't think he did anything wrong. I thought Flavian Pratt, one of these days, he's going to win one legitimately. Yes, I know he won with Country House, but that was through DQ. But he gives a good ride every time. He picked his way through traffic. He saved ground along the rail and just couldn't quite get there. But I thought it was an excellent race, and I consider him to be, if he can maintain that type of form, he should be a contender in the Preakness. Now, the Kentucky Derby, I thought he ran a great race. And, 4th out of 20, he gets a +2. The Louisiana Derby closed like a freight train after hitting his head on the gate. And, he to close that far wide with the big fractions he did, I thought it was an excellent effort, and he gets a +2 for that. Will he move forward? Now, that is the question. Brad Cox does not do this too often, but he did do with a horse moving into the Lexington a couple years ago. Cannot remember who it is, and he won on short rest. So it can be done. I don't think Brad Cox would put this horse in the race unless he had a reason, and he had a belief that Catching Freedom will run a good race. Now, one of the things I did like about the Derby that we did anticipate was Catching Freedom was more forwardly placed. He was more involved in the race early and not just way at the back making one run. So I thought that was positive, and I think it shows a sign that a horse who is progressing and getting better. I am a little concerned about the 2 weeks rest, and as he hasn't really done that before. And so for progression, I think he can move forward. I think he can run a good race, but I'm only giving him a +1 because I'm not quite sure he can necessarily move forward. Let's say he can maintain his Derby form. And if he can do that, I think he's a contender here. But again, the lack of pace would require him to get a little more forwardly engaged in the race, more so than in the Kentucky Derby. So he gets a +5, which is a very good score. But I do have a bit of a reservation as to whether we'll get a completely top effort from Catching Freedom. Next is Muth. Muth we haven't seen since the Arkansas Derby because we all know why. And this horse is clearly the one to beat. I don't think there's any doubt about it. If we look, the Arkansas Derby, he just blew that field away, very confidently ridden, and nobody really challenged him. Once Timberlake threw in the towel, nobody really came to get him. Just Steele rallied up behind him, but he was no threat to beat him. This is a horse who's proven to be classy all the way across his career. He's only finished second, or out of them, he's only finished, other than the only race he didn't win, he finished second. And that was back to Prince of Monaco, another Bob Baffert. And it was a while ago. This horse is top quality. And so he gets a +2. I think it's very certain that he will run as big a race as he can. So he gets +2 for progression. total of +4. Mystic Dan, okay, our Kentucky Derby winner. Say what you want about that race. I thought that was a jockey's win. Brian Hernandez gave that horse an outstanding ride. Now, you saw how Mystic Dan won the race. He saved ground all the way along the rail, and he was begging for the finish line at the finish. Was he the best horse that day? No. Was Brian Hernandez the best jockey that day? Yes. So, there's a couple of things that bother me about Mystic Dan coming in here, namely 5-2 on him, which I think is a major league underlay. Now, for the Kentucky Derby, he's going to get a +2 because he won the race, of course. If you recall from our Kentucky Derby Elements videos in the past, we gave Mystic Dan a 0 for the Arkansas Derby because it was an unimpactful third. He did the same thing as he did in the Derby, saved ground all the way along the rail, and he just didn't have much in the tank to deal with Muth or Just Steel. Which horse shows up? Well, maybe it was the same one for the Derby and the Arkansas Derby. He just got a little bit, he just had things work a little better for him in the Kentucky Derby. Needless to say, he's a Kenny McPeak, and Kenny McPeak places his horses extremely well. We know this. You don't win the Oaks Derby double unless you know how to do that. However, do we really want Mystic Dan at that short a price in the Preakness, thinking that he can make a move forward to deal with the better horses in this race? I think not. I'm really not thinking he is going to put forth a good effort. Now, there is rain in the forecast, and we do know this horse likes the slop and can run well in it. But really, more realistically, I think if you go back to that Southwest Stakes, I have a feeling it was more the rail bias that was created by the mud that helped him as opposed to the mud itself. In any event, Mystic Dan, to me, is not the best horse in this field, and I doubt he's going to be the best horse in the Preakness. He's getting a -1 for progression because perhaps he can run a decent race, but will he run one good enough to win this one? I don't think so. So overall, he gets a +1 class rating. Seize the Gray is trained by the coach. I hope we all heard that this time. Sorry it was a misspeak last time. I know he's a trainer, not an owner. He does own horses, but he doesn't own this one. He trains Seize the Gray. Sorry. Okay, Pat Day Mile winner. Don't see too many of them running the Preakness, so he's coming back on 2 weeks rest. We know the coach is MO. He likes to run his horses, and he can surprise on occasion. Well, if we look at Seize the Gray, the Pat Day Mile was not the greatest of fields, but he did win the race, and he did win in a pretty convincing fashion. But I'm not going to give him a +2 for that because I don't think the quality of the field was terribly good. So he gets a +1. The Bluegrass Stakes, he ran okay, but he didn't factor in the race really at all. So he gets a -1. The Jeff Ruby Stakes on synthetic, I thought he ran a very good third. He gets a +1 in what was a little, it was a pretty good field. Not a great one, it's pretty good. So progression-wise, the whole issue is the short rest. Is that, we know the coach can surprise on occasion. And Seize the Gray, maybe he can. But let's remember, the Pat Day Mile was a 1-turn race. This is 2 turns. And, maybe... I'm not sure it overly sets up terribly well, or as well, as the Pat Day Mile did for Seize the Gray on Derby Day. He's coming back on 2 weeks rest, and this is his 5th start in a couple of months. That's a lot. So I'm giving him a -1 for progression. He could run a decent race. I don't think he's as good as the best horses in this field. I think that's safe to say. Will he outrun his odds? I don't know. I'm not thinking it's likely, but he gets a 0. He's right in the middle. It could go either way. I tend to believe he's not. The form he's displayed will not win the Preakness. Let's say that, in my opinion. So now we come to the other coach entrant, Just Steel, who I think at 15-1 is a little generous. I think he's better than that. He has a zigzag race pattern. We all know this. good race, bad race. Arkansas Derby, his best race yet. Kentucky Derby, not very good. He was sent up to the lead early. I thought that was a big mistake by Keith Asmussen that day. I'm not sure. That may have been greenness or first time in the Derby. Who knows? The other thing it may signal is a horse who was... a lot of times when horses do bounce, that's what happens. They get keen early and then they fall right back. And that might have been the reason for it, because the Arkansas Derby, Just Steele ran a monster race. He ran a really, really solid race. And the Derby obviously gets a -2 because he just, he finished, 17th? So not good. Arkansas Derby, I thought he ran a very good second. The Rebel Stakes, not so good, but he also had a bit of an excuse, so he doesn't get a -2 because he was carried wide, and he has been carried wide in quite a few races. Progression-wise, the pattern suggests that, yes, he will run a better race. However, he's run a lot this year, and honestly, after the Rebel Stakes, I thought they should have given him a break. And I was wrong. He ran a great Arkansas Derby, but I think maybe the Kentucky Derby, it might have caught up with him a bit. So can he factor in this race? Sure. Could he rebound from a subpar Derby? Yeah, he could. I'm not really banking on it, though. So everything else evens out. So because he's good race, bad race, that makes sense. So he gets a -2 class rating because of the Derby. So now we come to one of our new shooters, Tuskin Gold, and this is an exciting horse. I think everybody is on board with that. Ran a really good Louisiana Derby, just didn't quite have enough to get to Catching Freedom or Honor Marie, but if you consider it was only his third lifetime start, it was a pretty damn good effort. Chad Brown knows how to get horses to the Preakness. He points to it. He's done that on occasion. In the past, Cloud Computing comes to mind, not We the People. You guys know who I mean. A couple years ago, it starts with an E. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but anyway, the Chad Brown who won on the front end. I was at that race too, and I can't believe I can't remember it. But anyway, Chad Brown will point horses to the Preakness, particularly when he sees something in them that warrants sending him to a big race. So I think it's very safe to say that Tuskin Gold will be ready to run for this race. The Louisiana Derby I thought was a very good third. I give a +1. If he got second, maybe it would have been a +2, but he was really no match for Honor Marie or Catching Freedom. So +1 in a very good race, I might add. Progression-wise, I don't think there's much doubt, in my mind anyway, that he's going to run a big race. So he gets a +2 for progression. Chad Brown knows how to get him ready. So a +3 for form. Finally, we come to Imagination, and this is the other Bob Baffert. He finished second in the Santa Anita Derby, won the San Felipe. He does suffer from what Stronghold did in the Derby, and what our perception of him is that he's really not running against much. This was a late bloomer for Bob Baffert. He's taken a little more time with this one, but you'd have to believe that this one is probably just starting to get good. So I think we might see a marked improvement over the Santa Anita Derby. Now, the real question is how much? Because an effort like that, you saw what happened with Stronghold. He just isn't fast enough. He wasn't fast enough on Derby Day. I thought he ran a good race. He just wasn't fast enough, and I think the class maybe got to him a little bit. Well, Imagination finished second to Stronghold and dueled with him all the way down the stretch in the Santa Anita Derby. He gets points for grit, and I'll give him a +1 in what was a subpar field. And I think he's definitely going to move forward. He doesn't get a +2 because I'm not sure, even if he moves forward, it's enough to factor in this race. And the reason being is that his prior speed numbers, at this point, I would think he'd be a little further along, let's say. However, could he take a step forward? Absolutely. It's entirely possible. And I think at 6-1, I think he's an underlay. I think he has to be. If you, yeah, I just think there's other horses more capable in here, but Imagination is certainly one that has to be on the radar and that we've got to pay attention to. So if we put them all together, here's what we've got. And you can see that Catching Freedom and Muth lead the class. Catching Freedom off has had more races, and he came out of the best race, the Kentucky Derby, and he ran a good race. So that's consequently why he gets a +5. Certainly Muth is one we definitely have to consider and would be the horse to beat here. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So consequently, he's got a +4 rating, came out of the Arkansas Derby, and is slated to run another big one and probably will take a step forward off of that. So Muth, logical at +4. Tuskin Gold, it's more on the potential that I expect, the potential race I expect him to run. I think he definitely will move forward. So a +3 is very logical. Mugatu and Uncle Heavy, I just think are a little outclassed here. More so Uncle Heavy, in my opinion, than Mugatu. But the race shape really doesn't seem like it's going to set up terribly well for them. So I think those -1s probably are pretty accurate. Just Steel is based more upon the good race, bad race aspect of his running, that Z pattern he has, that it's called zigzag. Good race, bad race. The Derby was slated to be a bad race, and it was. And consequently, that's why he gets a -2, because the good and the bad even out, but his last race was a bad one. Now, he could very well come back and run an excellent Preakness. It's very possible. But he has done a lot of running in here, and he seems like he's a little bit of a cut below the very best. So while being a good horse, I don't know that -2 is necessarily reflective of what we'll get from him, but I'm not expecting a tip-top effort from Just Steel. So that's what form looks like. Now we're on to class. So that's form, and we will have postings on class, speed, and pace, so be patient for that. They'll be coming later this week, and I hope you're getting a lot out of these so far. We did one for the Kentucky Derby, and I'm sure a lot of you took a look at that, and I hope it was to your benefit for sure. I hope our analysis helps you, as always, with your own wagering and your own handicapping. So I hope you get something out of it. We'll have more to come for sure. If you do like things like this and what we do over here at Right at the Wire, please like and subscribe. And we do thank all of you who've recently come on board. It's really exciting. This community's growing pretty rapidly, and that's thanks to you, so we do appreciate it. Just wanted to pass that on, and be on the lookout for more content from us throughout the Preakness, the Belmont, and into Saratoga and Del Mar and the rest of the thoroughbred racing season. Glad to have you on board if you're a newcomer, and thanks to all of you loyal supporters who've been with us for all this time, and really looking forward to a bright future at Right at the Wire. So thanks again. I'll talk to you soon. Until then, be well.